Welcome to the Voice of College Football USC channel. I'm your host, Rick Anaya, aka LBC Trojan, and welcome to a special edition of Trojans Talk on Tap, where I keep your glass full of the latest buzz on USC football, sometimes an opinion on college football, and always a craft beer recommend at the end of the show. But this is a special edition, and I want to acknowledge a new viewer who subscribed to the channel. Thank you very much. Doug H. contacted me after our first premiere video of Trojans Talk on Tap. It was Black Friday in the Pac-12, talked about what happened on Friday, August 4th with 5 teams leaving the Pac-12 that day and joining Colorado. Colorado had left previously for the Big 12. And so last week, if you recall, there was a temporary restraining order granted to Washington State and Oregon State. And Doug H. sent me a message saying, hey, sent me the article. He said, well, here's another wrinkle. Would love to get your take on this. Doug, thanks for your question. Appreciate you subscribing to the channel. And Doug is a UCLA fan, so I appreciate the Bruins tuning in and getting some college football content. And that's what you're going to get here on Trojans Talk on Tap on the Voice of College Football USC channel. So, Doug, we're going to get into it. And I thought none other than inviting the host and a co-host of the USC Postgame Live, Tony Altimore. Tony Altimore I've been following conference realignment for over 2 years. And so, Tony, pleased to have you join us on the show today and give us the latest update on what's happening with the Pac-12, with the two remaining members, Washington State and Oregon State. Just to back up a little bit to get everybody who's tuned in, what's happening with the Pac-12. As you know, I mentioned Black Friday on August 4th. There was a similar Black Friday on September 1st when Stanford and Cal were accepted to go to the ACC along with SMU, leaving the Pac-12 with 2 teams. And that's last week. They filed the temporary restraining order. We're going to get into that. And let's find out with Tony here what he sees happening, the possibilities. There's a few possibilities. Tony, first of all, thanks for joining the show today. And how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here as always. Fight on.
Fight on, Tony. So tell us, what was this temporary restraining order? What are Oregon State and Washington State trying to do with this legal maneuvering?
Well, there's a lot of mess right now in some nuance of the Pac-12 bylaw wording. So the Pac-12 bylaws, if we think about like an originalist mindset, were written to strip voting rights away from schools who leave the conference. And there's some debate in the wording of it as to whether it's when you leave the conference, whether it's when you notify the conference, how you notify the conference, a little bit mushy things that, depending on a person's perspective, they will vociferously argue one way or the other. But again, the intention of it was for teams that leave the conference to not be able to vote on the Pac-12 board. And for example, if you leave the conference, like actually leave, in theory, then they would be able to withhold your revenue and some things like that because you had left. So again, and we don't need to wordsmith here in the nuance of these wordings. But when USC and UCLA, and by the way, the board is the board of the 12 presidents, which You guys, we've talked about it here before, going back to 1959 when they founded the conference. The board of the presidents is the ultimate control piece of the conference. So when USC and UCLA left, they just kind of pieced out and said, okay, well, we're not going to the board meetings. Because again, the board meetings typically, by the way, there were only 3 board meetings a year. So there have been about 35 of them in the last year. But in a normal year, there would be 3. So USC and UCLA said, okay, well, for your meetings that deal with expansion, realignment, TV deal, it's not appropriate for us to be in here. And so there's a debate, which has not really been settled, as to whether USC and UCLA were recused from those future discussions or whether they were kicked off the board. So then when Colorado left, Pac-12 fired off a nasty letter to Colorado that said, we're stripping of your board representation, blah, blah, blah. Well, then as Washington and Oregon and Utah and Arizona State and left, they wrote and said, essentially, FYI, we are informing you that we are not going to be signing a grant of rights beyond August 1st, 2024, and we will not be part of your media deal going forward. However, we are not providing notice per the bylaws of our leaving the conference. So essentially saying like, hey, we're not surrendering our board seats. We understand that we will not talk about media rights in the future expansion, but we're not walking away. And the issue of this now is that there's two big fears from each side. So Washington State and Oregon State are afraid that the other 10 members will decide to dissolve the conference, just like what happened with the Pacific Coast Conference in 1958, when they decided to dissolve and split out all the assets. Because there is something like a $40 or $50 million, conference savings emergency fund, and there is a ton of money due to the conference over the next 6 years for the NCAA basketball tournament funds, that come in. And so Oregon State and Washington State have maintained that they should be the only two schools on the board anymore, and that no one else should have a seat on the board, which in theory means that they could just decide we're going to appoint ourselves the only people in the championship game. And there's a conference, I don't remember if it's the CAA, there's one of them in the East Coast, one of the smaller FCS or no football conferences, has a rule that if you leave the conference, you can't be in the tournaments. So Washington State and Oregon State could just, if they were the only two on the board, could just appoint themselves to we're going to play each other in the championship in December in Vegas. The rest of you can go pound sand. We're going to play each other for the championship basketball in Vegas and take the tournament slot. The rest of you can go pound sand. We're going to take all the money for ourselves, and this year none of you will get a penny, and we'll get $400 million. There's a lot of again, it's kind of absurd, right? But the other schools are saying you don't get the chance to make that decision to be absurd or not. And meanwhile, the other 10 say, well, we want to have a board meeting to talk about the future. And one of the future issues, which is very real, and if any of you guys have ever been part of a company that's been through a merger, it's a very real deal, is the issue of employee retention. I mean, they have to keep this conference going for a year. They have 400 events they have to put on television, and that takes staff. So they needed an employee retention plan. So the commissioner said, was it 2 weeks ago or whatever, we're going to have all 12 presidents come and have a meeting to talk about the future. Washington State and Oregon State were terrified and said, absolutely not, because we think you'll vote to dissolve the conference and you'll screw us over. So they filed a motion in Whitman County, Washington. They filed for an emergency restraining order to prevent the meeting from happening under the argument that it could cause irreparable harm. Now, there's a lot of really, really strong legal arguments as to why this was a really weak case. Strangely, the Pac-12's lawyers made none of those arguments. So whether the Pac-12 was sort of cognizant of I don't know if they weren't really trying. I don't know if they had idiot lawyers. I would hope not. But my smart lawyer friends have given me lots and lots of reasons why this was a really weak argument. None of those arguments got made. But I kind of wonder if the Pac-12 was just kind of letting this happen. And with the judge, now funny enough, again, the judge made pretty reasonable decisions, but the judge is actually a Wazoo alum who's president of the Cougar Club of Whitman County, which is like being the president of the Trojan Club of Orange County, right? You can't make this up. So the president of the Cougar Club, yeah, exactly. The president of the Cougar Club of Whitman County. Again, lots of legal issues were wrong with this argument. But the judge kind of put a little halt in there, and he said, we're going to put in a restraining order. The 12 of you can all approve things unanimously if you need to. Which actually, kind of a bit of a judge, cooler head prevailed. And the guy is a long time. He's not a hack. I mean, he's a respected judge. He's a longtime lawyer. Super shady that he's the president of the Cougar Club of Whitman County. but made a pretty fair ruling. So he put an emergency injunction in that said they were a restraining order, a temporary restraining order. The lawyers will come at me. Every jurisdiction uses different terms. This was a TRO that said that what they're going to do is for the until the court figures out what's next, there can be no official board meeting, and that then the 12 of them can make unanimous decisions going forward.
Wow, what great background, getting us caught up to speed, Tony, on what's happening with the temporary restraining order, why Oregon State and Washington State were motivated to do so. It sounds like they are taking their fate into their own hands. They want to make sure that the other 10 schools in the Pac-12, like you said, don't screw them over, because it's happened in the past, and they want to control their own destiny, and they're going to figure out what they want to do. And I've heard, Tony, maybe you can.
And for Rick, you and I have talked about this, but for those of you guys watching who don't know, this happened in the past. So the Pac-12 was not founded in 1915. The Pac-12 was founded in 1959. And yes, after the defections of 1957, when USC and UCLA and Cal left, followed by Washington, the Pacific Coast Conference could have continued, just like the Pac-12 right now. They could have continued, but instead they voted to dissolve, and then USC, UCLA, Washington, later joined by Stanford, created the new Pac-12, along with Cal, later created the new Pac-12. That left Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State, and Idaho independent, homeless, without a conference. So one of the fears is that could happen again. So if the 10 schools vote to dissolve the Pac-12 conference, just like they did the Pacific Coast Conference, that could leave Oregon State and Washington State without a conference. And also, it could leave everyone else able to dip their hands into the money. And if they can dip their hands into that money, that is, about $100 million. Everybody gets about $10 million or something of money that's there. And if you're Washington, Oregon, UCLA with your Calamony, if you're the 4 teams going to the Big 12, if you can grab an extra $10 million, are you just going to let Wazoo and Oregon State keep it? And that's kind of the argument.
All great information, Tony. And so for the fans out there that are maybe Pac-12 fans, maybe not Pac-12 fans, but are college football fans, and want to get up to speed on what can possibly happen, we have this temporary restraining order to give Oregon State and Washington State control of their future destiny. So what can happen next? I'm sure there's a number of different possibilities. Do Oregon State and Washington State keep the Pac-12 name? I understand that the NCAA gives them 2 years to get to build up with more than 6 members to retain their AQ status. Do they go to a different conference? Do they get invited to a different conference? What are some of the possibilities that you're hearing, Tony, that Oregon State and Washington State can do moving forward?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Rick. There's 3 options. You're totally right. Let's hit the first one first, which is the easiest one, which is one that has recently come up in discussions. Now, I don't have any direct connections to the Big 12, so I don't profess to. But a lot of people in the Big 12 world right now believe that, and some of them believe very strongly, that Oregon State and Washington State may end up being invited to join the Big 12 at whatever partial revenue share, whatever the deal will be. So that would actually be the easiest. And if they did that, they could actually probably dissolve the Pac-12 and all get a piece, which means also that, the other 4 members of the Big 12 would get their piece too. So that is a possibility. I would say we have to kind of defer to the Big 12 people on that, defer to their TV partners. That's on them. But so that's kind of on the side. There's 2 really interesting things being discussed right now. Now, the first one is they have hired Oliver Luck, who is the commissioner of the UAC, past AD at West Virginia. I mean, he's sort of a master of this stuff. And Oliver Luck has gone through and is working with them to look at an idea of rebuilding the Pac-12. And there's 2 ways that could happen. The other thing they could do is join the Mountain West. The American was in discussions with them, but the American has backed away from that. The reason for that is just the travel from the American school, from Temple in East Carolina to send your volleyball team to Pullman and Corvallis. It's enormous travel, and it's travel that doesn't have Big Ten money to pick up the tab.
Right.
So that's why the American's kind of out of it. So the sort of main idea that people are talking about right now is that they would rebuild the Pac-12. Now, they probably steal some teams out of the American for that. They might invite Memphis. They might invite, I don't know, North Texas. They might invite, who knows? So we'll see what would happen. That's all currently up in the air. But there's also another really interesting piece that Ross Dellinger wrote a really great article the other day that they're exploring, which is the idea of a soccer style. And this is wild, Rick. The idea of a soccer style Pac/Mountain West with promotion relegation. So the 8 best teams would be in the Pac, and the 8 worst teams would be in the Mountain West. And maybe every year, like the top 2 and the bottom 2 flip. And what you do then is you create a strong, and you'd probably bring a couple teams from the American in as part of this, and you create really this stronger pack that is clearly the fifth best conference, better than all the others, because it's refreshing itself with the better teams and flushing out the bottom.
So you're basically saying like a paid for performance model.
Exactly. The 8 best move up and the others go down. A really interesting idea, because I mean, there's good teams in the Mountain West. I mean, we just watched Fresno State we watched Fresno State beat Purdue at home. We watched Fresno State beat the snot out of Arizona State at Arizona State. We watched Wyoming take down Texas Tech. So I mean, there are good teams in the Mountain West, and there always have been good teams. Air Force just beat the snot out of Baylor last year. So yeah, I mean, there are good teams in the Mountain West. And so what if you had the best of the Mountain West together with Wazoo, Oregon State, Memphis, somebody, a couple other schools like that? There's some really cool stuff you could do.
Well, I think the TV partners might be interested in that, because they're always looking for a new angle to generate more viewers. So kind of like a survival conference with promotion and relegation. Who wouldn't love that?
Exactly, it'd be so fun. The other thing, guys. So I'm gonna be bad here. For audience, don't hate me for saying this. If you guys are subscribers to Trojans Talk on Tap with Rick, if you subscribe to our USC Voice of College Football channel, you know more about conference stuff than 99% of the world. So if you put your mindset in the other 99% of the world who doesn't really follow this stuff that closely, the brand value of the Pac-12 is big. I mean, again, this is people think about a century of history. They think about all the great teams. So there is big brand value in the Pac-12. I honestly believe a huge mistake. A lot of people don't know this. The American Conference today is the old Big East. Quite literally is the Big East.
Yeah.
The Big East, when the Catholic schools wanted to go off on their own way, they actually sold to them in exchange for the money rights that they were due in exit fees. They sold to them the rights of the Big East name. So the current Big East is a brand new conference founded in 2013, 2014, whatever it was, that is brand new, but just took the Big East's brand. So I believe that was a mistake on behalf of the American Conference, because the American Conference was still called the Big East and had always been called the Big East, I think it would be a much stronger brand. And I think that that's a lesson that the Pac-12 and the Mountain West know, because to a lot of the Mountain West teams, to their fans, to their schools, the Pac-12 was always the high and mighty, like the dream goal, right? That was and so quite honestly, even if it's a bit dented, tarnished, most of the pieces broken off, whatever, the idea that they could get into the Pac-12 it has enormous symbolic value and brand value to those schools.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because you're seeing what the Pac-12 is doing on the field this year, just weeks
It's
after.
ridiculous.
Yeah, and we've known this all along, Tony. College football fans that are younger, the Pac-12 is a punchline. Um, the the
All of
owner
its
of the
own
channel,
doing.
the owner of the channel, Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. And if you're not subscribed to the voice of college football and you're new, please take the time to like and subscribe to the voice of college football here on the USC channel, where you're going to be getting content on USC pretty much every day of the week. Starting off on Monday, you have at 8 o'clock Pacific time with Mark Rogers, Matt Zemek, and Tim Prangley Jr. Tim's on the USC postgame live show with Tony and myself on Saturdays after every game. You got Trojans Talk on Tap, which is the new content. Thank you, Mark, for allowing me to create this space to give more USC and college football content. So Mark Rogers, he knows what the Pac-10 and Pac-12 was all about. And now the rest of the country is getting to see a record 8 teams in the AP top 25 this week. That's 2/3 of the conference. And there's some great matchups this week, including, as we're talking, Oregon State going up to the Palouse to play Washington State. This
Showdown.
is a game at 4 p.m. Pacific on Fox, and it's a great opportunity for Oregon State and Washington State to show what type of football they play, how they're invested. The crowd is going to be on fire. And who knows, Tony, what do you think? Could this be a showcase for conferences, TV networks, to say, hey, look, let's find a home for these guys? What are your thoughts on that, Tony?
It could be. I mean, and I think the game. I think they're playing the Colorado Oregon game. I think right before it on Fox. I mean, Fox is a whole night of Pac-12, right? I mean, this is awesome. You start off with Oregon and Colorado, which is a huge game from Autzen. Then you got the Cougs and the Beavs, and then you've got USC and Arizona State from the desert, where, Rick, as you and I know, anything can happen in the desert. A place there's ghosts in the desert.
That's right.
So so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, no, there's a lot of it's certainly a chance for them to have a big game. They're on a big stage, and they deserve the big stage. I mean, these two schools. Absolutely. Look at what Wazoo's doing. They're kicking people's butts. They just spanked Wisconsin at home. Look at what the Beavs are doing. Let's remember that the Beavs they played. They're undefeated this season. They're having a great year. They've sort of shown that DJ Uiagalelei was not the problem at Clemson. And then in their last game of last year, they just put a beat down on Florida.
That's right.
So I mean, these are good teams. And they're teams that deserve to be in a better conference. I put a thing up today. I looked at and I was looking at it from that idea of that Big 12 standpoint. And again, I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know if anything will happen. The Big 12 people like to yap. No conference in the history of conferences has liked yapping about its membership potentials more than the Big 12. So, I don't know if there's any seriousness to it or not. I hope there is, because I think that would really be the best solution for them. I mean, the other stuff would be really neat for the game. Like, I love the idea of the promotion and relegation. I think that would be awesome. I think it'd be fascinating to watch and a lot of fun. But purely for Oregon State and Washington State, the optimal situation, I think, at this point would be if the Big 12 found some money for them.
Tony, I really appreciate you joining me today. Fans out there that are new to the channel, that you want to follow Tony on Twitter at TJ Altsmore. Tony's always got a lot of great information on at the university level in terms of the Power 5 conferences, basically all conferences throughout. He's got top level information on Twitter. He will keep you abreast of what's happening with conference realignment with respect to the last 2 teams in the Pac-12. Always a good follow. Tony, a question for you here. For, let's say, the average college football fan that maybe wasn't following conference realignment this past year, which was crazy. I mean, we literally have 17 teams in the transfer portal, with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC next year. Now we have 4 teams from the Pac-12 going to the Big Ten. See if I can keep this straight. We have the 4 corner schools going to the Big 12. We have the Bay Area schools, Cal and Stanford, going east to the ACC. and we have SMU going to the ACC as well. Did I leave anybody out? Did I leave anybody out?
No, I'll tell you one of my favorite lines. Actually, a guy I know on Twitter messaged me. And he said we were looking at some conference ranks, and he said, as an Oregon alum with a master's, I think he said something, as an Oregon alum with a master's from Johns Hopkins, who plays their Division I sports in the Big Ten, he said, I never imagined Oregon versus Johns Hopkins might someday be a Big Ten showdown.
So my question would be, let's say there's some college football fans out there, and they're seeing what's going on with the Pac-12 and with Colorado and Deion Sanders and them emerging as the number 19 team in the country. This is going to, when they play USC on Fox at 9 a.m. Pacific on the 30th of September, which is going to be an electric game, that will be the 5th consecutive time they're on national television. Who would have ever thunk that? So with all craziness happening, is there any possibility that the Pac-12 could have a chance to come back? I mean, could the TV networks or the presidents have a different decision? Could the grant of rights that were signed with the new TV contracts, could things be reconsidered and change happen to keep the Pac-12 together? I know that sounds crazy, but just thought I'd throw it out there. What are your thoughts?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed. There was some consideration excuse me, last fall, where UCLA had, and I don't know about the USC contract, but the UCLA contract with the Big Ten had a provision to whatever a certain point where UCLA could get out of it for $15 million breakup fee. And that was at a time when, if you guys have really followed sort of what came out later in the, sort of that Pac-12 Black Friday, the Pac-12 had made some offers to the University of California Regents that they would pay UCLA like $55 million or something, 50 some million dollars, and pay the UCLA breakup fee if UCLA would stay. Of course, that didn't happen. That has moved forward. I don't know exactly what the level is of all the other contracts, but I believe that ship has sailed. And the schools joining the Big 12, one of the things that is kind of sad, the Big 12 has this ridiculous, jokingly called the blood oath membership fee, where the Big 12 not only has its grant of rights, but has a 99-year membership agreement that you owe what will soon be about, because it varies based on the payments of the past year, but it will soon be about a $100 million exit fee or $120 million exit fee or something from the Big 12. So the teams that have gone to the Big 12, I fear, are there essentially forever. Certainly unless they had some reason to pay that astronomical fee. The teams going to the ACC, Cal and Stanford have now signed the ACC's grant of rights and the ACC's exit fee. And those of you guys who know about what's happened with Florida State and Clemson in those discussions know the ACC membership agreement is equally unbreakable. So I think one of the sad things for West Coast fans is, if only this had happened about a year earlier, or the TV stuff had been a year later, they might have been a different story. But I think that ship has sailed, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's a shame that continued poor leadership in the Pac-12, both with both commissioners and the university presidents, led to what's happening here. It's a shame. And yes, college football is changing right before our eyes with the transfer portal, NIL, also with the changing television model as we're moving from cable to linear. You got to keep your eye on what's happening with Amazon, Disney, and Apple TV. The funding model that funds college football is totally different. It's changing. I was listening to Pat Chun, the AD at Washington State, on Wilner and Canzano, and he said you're going to see more changes here in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years because that is changing along with what's happening with NIL and the transfer portal. And take a look at it. Do we really have leadership at the NCAA level? How can you let realignment like this happen? How can you put out a statement in July of 2021 about NIL, and then you really don't hear anything from the NCAA putting any guardrails on it, and so you have to have outside Congress people, Congressmen Tommy Tuberville and Joe Manchin. Right now, they're in Washington D.C. presenting the PASS Act, right?
Well,
to
and
try to
I
cover it.
understand Chris Murphy gave it a big thumbs down too, and told them, you let this happen, and it's not going to be fixed until you start paying your employees like they're the employees they are.
Yeah. So
Chris Murphy hammered him hard.
that's college football. College football for you. It's beautiful and ugly at the same time. And you know what? We love it. But Tony, appreciate you coming on. What are you working on right now, Tony? Share with our viewers where they can find you.
Well, anybody tonight, if you need anything tonight, everybody wants to chat Pac-12 tonight. Join us, Pac-12 Chat Show Live, 7:30 Pacific, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. And then I'll be here with Rick and Tim live after the USC Arizona State game. And also, if for some of you, I've had some folks reach out to me that have wanted to talk about data or statistics and stuff like that for their schools and how their school stacks up in realignment. So if anybody's interested in that, feel free to shoot me a DM anytime. Would be able to chat with you guys, and happy to always talk to folks about that.
Tony, appreciate you joining us today on Trojans Talk on Tap to give the latest update on what's happening with the two remaining members in the Pac-12, Oregon State and Washington State, who ironically will be playing in Pullman. Good luck to those teams, the rest of the Pac-12 teams this weekend.